Module 1 begins with asking the question, what is compensation? As you can see here, compensation is a symbiotic relationship between the employer and employee. Or very simply, you work and therefore you get paid. So the question is, why does compensation matter? Why can't I just pay my employees what I'd like? Well, compensation is directly related to how well a company does. If you have a strong compensation strategy that meets up with your organizational goals, then you are going to have success. For instance, compensation is a motivator. So your compensation strategy plan that you develop will directly affect how your employees behave. If you are looking for efficiency or customer service, what are the goals of your organization? That should help drive your compensation plan. Also, compensation can attract top talent. With today's digital world, it is so easy to pull up reviews on organizations and you can see who the top payers are. You want to attract that top talent, so you want your reviews on your compensation plan to be, all thumbs up. And compensation also can help retain a workforce. People will not stick around your company long if they don't feel like they are being paid fairly, or if the benefit package is less than desirable. Pay affects the workforce with the incentive effect and the sorting effect. That is, the way in which pay affects the employee behavior and motivation levels is the incentive pay. We also see that there is a sorting effect with compensation strategies. For instance, your comp plan can affect who applies for a job, as we discussed on the last slide, and it can also affect on how long you retain employees. For instance, if you pay for performance, low performers will earn less and therefore self-select to leave and search for employment elsewhere. You will notice as you read this text that a lot of the terminology is interchangeable. I like the term compensation philosophy, which is simply the organization objectives plus the compensation plan that is chosen equals the compensation philosophy of the organization. And you will see when your objectives and your plan align, you have a great compensation philosophy. And that becomes part of your culture in the organization. If you have a strong compensation philosophy, you'll have a strong culture in the organization. This is a graphic representation of the compensation illustrated by our authors on page 13. As you can see here, compensation is made up of more than just the salary. It is a combination of what we call total rewards. So as you can see, the total rewards is made up of total compensation and relational returns. Relational returns are more effective. They're recognition, things like job security, a challenging work environment, interesting work, prestige, all of those things that kind of go along with having the job of X. Then on the other side, we have total compensation, and that's made up of what we all strive for, cash compensation and benefits. So under the cash compensation, you can see we have the base pay, what is the starting pay, and then we have different things like merit increases or COLA, which is the cost of living adjustments, incentive pay. And then over on the benefit side, we can see it's broken down into things like income protection, work-life balance, very big in today's world. What type of allowances you have at work, things like having cell phones or cars, those types of things. So as you can see from this model, there's a lot of decisions that will have to go into creating a compensation strategy when you look at compensation is much more than just how much you pay your employees. I want to direct your attention to page 19 of your textbook. This is the pay model that our authors are using, and this is the basis for the structure of this text. So there are three components in the pay model: the objectives, the policies, and the techniques. And they all work together in order to create your compensation plan or your pay system. Again, a lot of terminology is used interchangeably here. So with your objectives, you always want to, your end goal are your objectives. So you want to clearly define what your organization objectives are. What do you want your compensation plan to do for you? So once you have your objectives clear, then you want to look at the 4 policies. We have internal alignment, competitiveness, contributions, and management. We're going to take a look at these each more in depth later in the text. But for now, I want to just organize your thinking that we're creating objectives. We're going to address each of the 4 policies, and the techniques are how we go from the policy to achieve our objectives. So now that we are designing our pay system and we have clearly selected our objectives for the organization, now we want to look at how these 4 policies, which are the foundation, we're going to take a closer look. So here we have internal alignment, and that really is just within your organization. Comparison of the jobs and the skills, determining the different pay levels. How are you going to pay the administrative staff over the managers? How does that look? You can't have an administrative assistant making the same as the manager, or maybe you can. Those are the decisions you have to make based on the objectives and the goals of your organization. So then we take a look at external alignment. So that is, what are your competitors doing? If you have a competitor out there and you have a similar product or service, you know, are they paying really high compared to you? What kind of benefits do they have? What kind of work-life balance do they have? So taking a look at what else is going out there will help you with your workforce. Then we have the employee contributions. So that is, what is the pay mix of your compensation? What are your incentive pay, team-based pay, performance pay? What type of those things are going on? What behaviors do you want your employees to do? And then you have the management of the system. And I think that sometimes is maybe the hardest, because you're dealing with people, you're dealing with humans, so you always have to look, everything is always changing. The pay system that you have today might be different than the pay system 3 or 4 years from now. So the management is something that you have to pay attention to all of the time. What is going on? What is going on? If you have stock options and your stock isn't doing very well, you might have to realign some other items in your pay system to make it work. In Chapter 2, we examine how strategy affects your compensation plan. So just like in a battle or a game of chess, the strategy that you develop will affect the end result, whether you win or lose. And this is the same as in business. So strategy is the choices that organizations make to compete for talent or for the competitive advantage. So is there a formula? Is there one right answer? And the answer is no. And as you can see with our examples that our authors give us, there are many different ways to achieve organizational goals. There's many different strategies. So that's sort of the gamble that a company has to take, but if you take a step-by-step approach, you may find to have more success. Now, our authors talk about 3 different competing tech companies, Google, Microsoft, and SAS, and they have explained for you how they each have a different strategic approach for their compensation strategies. So read over that, and when you do, I want you to stop and think about what their strategies are, how they differ, and what do you really feel is the better choice. As we said, there is really no one right answer. So what is one to do? Well, look to the research. Current research shows many different theories, and one here we have is the AMO theory. This theory was developed by 2 experts in the human resource management field, Peter Boxall and John Purcell. So their theory says that performance is the output of the ability, motivation, and opportunity that the employees have to achieve the goals. So when your employees are motivated with the incentives that you give them, and they have the ability, they are capable employees, then, and you give them the opportunity to make decisions, that is, they are part of the decision-making process. All of these items, when they work together, the output is performance or productivity. Compensation strategies are important. So whether you base your model on a theory such as the AMO theory, or on some of the models, the step-by-step models that our authors talk about, it is really important. Every organization that pays people has a comp strategy. They may not know it, but they do. Some are very well defined and transparent for all to see. Some not so much. Think about some of the jobs that you've had. What types of compensation strategies did your employers have? Did you realize? Did people talk about the compensation? Did the coworkers feel there was fair pay? Or did they feel that it was willy-nilly and certain people got raises while other people that did all the work did not? Those are some of the things that you want to think about. I'm going to give you an example of a former job that I had held while in grad school, using this model to explain the compensation strategy. So I worked at a high-end steakhouse, very expensive steaks, very expensive wine, and the organization's objectives was to have the guests have an enhanced experience. They would strive to delight the customer. So their organization was set up, and the policy we're looking at is the internal policy, because there was a lot of other policies that they had to deal with competition. But with the internal policy, their techniques were to have a very well-trained staff. Now, as being a server, my compensation didn't come directly from the company, it came from the guests, but together we had to work together to achieve the company's goals. And once we achieved the company's goals, there was a very high probability that I was going to have a high income. The techniques that they used were training the employees, and they trained us well. We had ongoing training. We would enter whenever a new product would come out, there was extensive training with that. Constantly training on wine, not only tasting the wine, describing of the wine, and different techniques for selling. So as you can see, the company that I had worked for had a very clearly defined compensation strategy. That meant the more money I made, the better they did. It was a symbiotic relationship that worked out well for both of us. At times, I still miss that job. Now we know compensation strategies are important. We know that every organization that pays people has to have one. We've heard some theories. We know there's no one right answer. So what do? How do we build this total compensation strategy? So our authors put together this graphic representation. It's a cyclical model. And you will see that we're going to start with assessing the total compensation implications. And really this means what specific aspects must you focus on to be competitive? How does your compensation strategy reflect the culture of your organization? What do your employees want? Is it one size fit all? Probably not. Not especially if you employ multiple generations. In a person's work life, they need and desire things differently at different ages. Will your employees have choice? How flexible do you want the benefits to be? Is that economically feasible? Are there labor union rules to consider? These are all some things that you really have to, these are total compensation implications. So next, we're going to look at mapping our total compensation strategy. Now, the authors have a visual representation of this on Exhibit 2.8 on page 55, if you want to reference that. And this uses all the elements of the pay model to map the strategies of Microsoft and SAS on the model. So this is a process, is a framework to see where your values lie in your compensation strategy. If you have a straight line when you do your model, you're going to have a difficult time. What you're doing is you are assessing what value you place on each of the aspects in order to drive where your strategy should lie. So, okay, so now it's time to implement the strategy. From the mapping exercise, you're going to design and implement your compensation strategy. And then we go up to the fourth step, which is, as we've learned, everything always changes. You have to constantly reassess and realign, and that's the management of the compensation strategy. Well, the question now is, does it pass the test? How well will this work? How do we know if our compensation strategy is going to achieve our goals? Well, test it. So we have a three-pronged test to see how well we predict our compensation strategy will work. We align, differentiate, and add value. These are the three questions we're going to ask. Does your pay strategy align with business strategies, internal strategies, external strategies? The second prong is differentiate. How does your pay strategy set you apart from the competitors? Why should a highly valued employee work for you rather than your competition? And then finally, add value. How does your plan add value to your organization? What is the return on investment? Does the end result of your compensation strategy achieve the organizational goals? Once you take a look at these questions, and if you can have a positive answer to all those, then hopefully you're leaning in the right direction. Throughout this module, we have learned there is no one right way to design a comp strategy. The strategy must be developed to align with organizational goals while taking into account the internal and external differences, anticipated employee behaviors, and the ability to manage over time. Our authors have laid out a framework for compensation strategy, which, as we have seen with examples, can be organized in many different ways to achieve the strategic advantage.